There must be someone to worry about my business transaction. I haven't the mind for it, so I have Mr. Swarthmore take care of everything. Do you suppose he's not doing a good job of it?
Mr. Metcalf, that remains to be seen. I haven't seen Mr. Tuttle in 2 months. For quite some time he would come in here almost every day on what I took to be his lunch hour.
In search of what?
Property transaction files. The list of the names of the owners of a given property lot and the dates on which that lot were transferred to another owner, along with the sale prices.
Why do you suppose he was interested in that?
He never said. I never asked. I haven't seen Mr. Tuttle in 2 months. I haven't seen Mr. Tuttle in 2 months. For quite some time he would come in here almost every day.
Where might one procure Chinaberry?
Chinaberry? Oh, it's very rare. Why, I recall when I first started working here 40 years ago, we brought some in for a study and then disposed of it. Since that time, we have no record of it being brought into England. If you want to obtain some, it would have to be done illicitly. But I don't recommend it. It has a lovely name, but it's deadly poison.
I could talk about the social doings of Messrs. Sloane, Swarthmore and Cartwright, but who would want to listen? They're a dull crowd all round.
Bobby Pike.
Well, if you insist. Sir Sidney attends all the best social functions, even the stuffiest ones the Times refuses to cover. Henry Swarthmore is a confirmed bachelor who attends only those galas which are obligatory to the prestige of the firm. Whitney Cartwright is the forgotten man on the social scene. He habitually sends his wife, a very charming woman, in his stead. She is usually accompanied by one of the lesser members of the firm.
What about a Mr. Melvin Tuttle?
Most recently the steady escort of Mrs. Cartwright, which is highly unusual. You see, her previous escorts were rotated quite frequently. People were beginning to talk in whispers, of course.
Were Mrs. Cartwright and Mr. Tuttle having an affair?
Alas, I can only speculate. If they were, they broke it off some 3 months ago. Since that time, Mrs. C has returned to the quiet rotation of office personnel. Actually, Tuttle always struck me as a bit of a social climber, which gives their liaison even more sinister connotations. I could talk about the social doings of Messrs. Sloane, Swarthmore and Cartwright, but who would want to listen? They're a I could talk about the social doings of Messrs. Sloane, Swarthmore and Cartwright, but who would want to listen? They're a dull crowd all round.
Melvin Tuttle, you say?
Yes, he was a young solicitor with Sloane, Swarthmore and Cartwright.
Sorry to say, Holmes, but I'm afraid the only thing I can offer you on this one is a pint or 3.
Shinwell, I will take you up on that the very moment we solve this case.
Melvin Tuttle, you say?
Yes, he was a young solicitor with Sloane, Swarthmore.
Melvin Tuttle, you say?
Yes, he was a young solicitor with Sloane, Swarthmore and Co.
It is terrible, simply terrible. He was such a fine young man. Consider me completely at your disposal, sir.
Thank you, Sir Sidney. I am interested in Mr. Tuttle's promotions within the firm.
Well, Swarthmore and Cartwright were responsible for those. You see, some 3 years ago, I partially retired from the firm.
Do you know if Mr. Tuttle was qualified for the job?
Oh, I trust Whitney and Henry's judgment implicitly.
Do you know much about the contracts Mr. Tuttle was working on?
Only the Heathcliff account. August Heathcliff, a prominent textile manufacturer. He asked me to conduct negotiations on an international merger. And when the preliminary work was completed, I turned things over to Mr. Cartwright. Tuttle assisted him.
I understand Mr. Cartwright left the firm's offices quite suddenly on Tuesday.
Yes, evidently for personal reasons. Well, I was aware that the Heathcliff contracts were due to leave by the Morning Post, so I did talk to Tuttle about them. And he told me that he'd have no problem meeting the deadline because Miss Walker had agreed to stay late and assist him. Swarthmore appeared shortly after that and volunteered to work with them as well. Everything seemed to be in hand.
Tell me about your meeting with Mr. Diggs on the day of his resignation.
Harold Diggs was a fine, experienced solicitor of very high caliber, and he was quite insulted that the promotion went to Tuttle.
Do you find the choice odd?
Well, as I've explained, it was not my decision.
Did Mr. Diggs threaten you or Mr. Tuttle in any way?
No, heavens, no. Diggs was angry, but the thought of him threatening anybody is thoroughly ludicrous.
Gin.
Well. Scotland Yard, busy as usual, I see.
Well, what we was doing was, we were... making sure the desks don't walk away.
And I can see they haven't, constables.
Don't miss a trick now, do you, Mr. Holmes? Besides, anything you would have found here of interest, the inspector already sent on its way.
I arrived at the building a little before 9 o'clock yesterday morning. Mrs. Porter and I rode the lift together to the 4th floor. Mr. Tutt.
There, Miss Spring. I know how difficult this must be.
Melvin was in his office. While Mrs. Porter made tea, I went in to see him.
It sounds as if your relationship with Mr. Tuttle was more than professional.
We'd been seeing each other for 8 months, but he ended it last week. I was going to return this little gold locket that he gave me, but he wouldn't hear of it. Now it's all I have left.
Did he tell you why he ended it?
He'd fallen in love with another woman.
What did you do after you saw him?
Wept a bit. Then returned to my desk where I remained there until...
Oh, buck up, Miss Spring. Sometimes a relationship is what happens when two people are waiting for something better to come along. You'll have your day. I just know you will.
Melvin Tuttle made a rapid rise in our firm simply because he was qualified to do the job. We shall all miss him.
Was it you who made the recommendation to promote him?
No, Mr. Cartwright did.
Well, why was Mr. Tuttle given a junior partnership over Mr. Diggs?
Diggs proved unsatisfactory. Tuttle showed initiative, spirit, and a good sense of judgment.
When did you last see Tuttle?
We worked together the evening before his death to complete some important contracts.
Did you provide your assistance at his request?
No. Sir Sidney asked me to lend a hand when Mr. Cartwright quite inexplicably left the office.
Can you shed any light on what caused him to leave so suddenly?
No, not in the least.
It appears Melvin Tuttle left no will.
Let us carry on then.
Perhaps we have time to return home. Mrs. Hudson is serving currant buns for tea.
Sorry, Watson. Until we solve this case, there will be no tea.
It appears Melvin Tuttle left no will.
Let us carry on then.
Perhaps we have... I spoke with Ellis, Holmes. He says he's drawing a blank on this one.
Pity.
I spoke with Ellis, Holmes. He says he's drawing a blank. I spoke with Ellis, Holmes. He says he's drawing a blank on...
What did you learn from Hall, Watson?
I learned he is on holiday with the burlesque dancer he recently met at the Allegro Theatre.
What did you learn from Hall, Watson?
I learned...
What did you learn from Hall, Watson?
I learned he is on holiday.
Sorry, Holmes. Couldn't find us all around.
Pity.
My heavens, Holmes. The good doctor is off playing cricket.
Well, let's not malinger then, Watson. It's not that important.
I do hope my gout doesn't flare up today.
Well, if it does, you can treat it yourself. You are a physician.
But of course. Evidently poor Quinn is home today. He's come down with the hives.
Oh, most undignified.
Evidently poor Quinn is home today. He's come down with the hives. Evidently poor Quinn is home today.